I woke up to the steady beep of a heart monitor, the sterile smell of disinfectant, and a splitting headache that made opening my eyes feel like torture. Route 87 was the last thing I remembered. Headlights veering into my lane, the screech of tires, and then nothing. The hospital room was empty. No flowers, no cards, no visitors waiting anxiously by my bedside. Just the clock on the wall ticking away at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I pressed the call button, my throat too dry to shout. When I reached for water on the nightstand, I noticed Margaret's leather-bound diary. Odd. My wife of 43 years never let that thing out of her sight. Why would it be here when she wasn't? I shouldn't have opened it. Some boundaries should remain sacred, even after 4 decades of marriage. But something felt wrong. The room's emptiness screamed louder than any monitor alarm could. June 15th. I can't bear to watch him suffer, but I can't forgive what I've discovered either. If he wakes up, everything changes. The entry was dated yesterday. If he wakes up, not when, if. That's when I noticed my wedding ring was missing, and the truth began to surface like a drowning man gasping for air. Margaret and I met during my residency at Massachusetts General in Boston. I was the ambitious cardiothoracic surgeon. She was the brilliant nurse practitioner who corrected my medication orders and wasn't afraid to challenge my diagnoses. We married in 1981 at her parents' Methodist church in Brookline, bought our colonial in Newton, and had our 2 children, Jason and Eliza, by 85. We were the perfect New England medical family. I built my practice, joined the board at Boston Medical Center, while Margaret balanced part-time nursing with raising our kids. We hosted 4th of July barbecues, carved pumpkins on Halloween, and our Christmas Eve parties became legendary among hospital staff. Our maple-lined driveway welcomed colleagues who'd become friends, all while I worked 80-hour weeks building a reputation as one of Boston's finest surgeons. "Dad's not coming again, is he?" became Jason's refrain at Little League games. Eliza stopped asking altogether by her 10th ballet recital. Margaret's lips would tighten, her eyes holding mine a moment too long across dinner tables when I'd arrive late, smelling of hospital soap and missed opportunities. "The kids need you, Richard," she'd say. "I need you." "Patients need me more," was my standard reply. The truth was messier. I felt more alive in the OR than anywhere else, more essential, more powerful. When both kids left for college, Jason to Penn, Eliza to Berkeley, Margaret suggested we downsize, travel, reconnect. I countered by accepting the chief of surgery position. "Just a few more years," I promised, "then we'll have all the time in the world." The memory that haunts me most happened at Jason's medical school graduation from Harvard. My son, following my footsteps despite my absence, invited me to stand beside him for the ceremonial white coat presentation. As we posed for photos, his mentor, Dr. Patterson, clapped my shoulder. "You must be so proud, Richard. Despite your schedule, you've raised a fine physician." Jason's smile faltered. "Actually, Dad didn't have much time for mentoring. Mom did the heavy lifting while he was saving Boston, one heart at a time." The crowd's awkward silence felt like a scalpel to my own chest. Margaret's hand found mine, squeezing too hard. Warning or consolation, I couldn't tell. After retirement 2 years ago, I finally had that time I'd promised. But Margaret had developed her own routines, her own friends, her own life parallel to mine. We occupied the same house, but different worlds. I suggested a grand gesture, a second honeymoon to Italy, where we've dreamed of going during our engagement. She agreed with a hesitation I chose to ignore. What I didn't know then was that Margaret had been keeping that diary since our 40th anniversary. What started as reflection had become a repository of grievances, of secrets I'd been too blind to see. Secrets about her loneliness, about connections she'd formed while I was absent, about decisions she'd made while waiting for me to finally show up to our marriage. And most devastating, a secret about a second phone I'd never noticed, with messages from someone named Thomas, who apparently had been giving her what I hadn't for nearly a decade. Our 45th anniversary was approaching last month. The kids wanted to throw us a surprise party, but Margaret somehow convinced them we should have a quiet family dinner instead, just the four of us and their spouses at our favorite seafood place in Cambridge. I'd decided this would be the perfect time to present Margaret with the tickets to Italy, finally keeping my promise. I spent weeks planning everything: the boutique hotels in Tuscany, the cooking classes in Bologna, the private boat tour of Venice's canals. For once, I was putting in the effort, being thoughtful, present. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was treating this like one of my surgeries, meticulously planned, leaving nothing to chance. The evening of our anniversary dinner, Margaret seemed distant. She'd been that way for days, taking calls in another room, disappearing for hours to run errands, and sleeping with that diary under her pillow. I chalked it up to menopause or retirement adjustment, the convenient explanations of a man who'd spent decades not really looking. "You seem preoccupied," I said as we dressed for dinner. "Just thinking about how quickly time passes," she replied, fastening a pearl necklace I'd given her for our 25th. 45 years is a long time to be married to someone. The way she emphasized "someone" sent a chill through me. At Lighthouse Bistro, Jason and his wife Caroline were already waiting, while Eliza texted that she and her husband were running late from the airport. The tension was palpable, despite the restaurant's warm atmosphere and the bottle of champagne already chilling at our table. "To the couple that showed us what commitment looks like," Jason toasted when we'd all gathered, though his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "To Mom," Eliza added pointedly, "for being the glue that held everything together." Margaret smiled tightly. "And to your father, who saved countless lives." The undercurrent was clear. At what cost? Throughout dinner, I noticed Margaret checking her phone. When she excused herself to the restroom, she took her purse with her. She was gone nearly 15 minutes, long enough for Jason to ask if she was feeling all right. "Your mother's fine," I said with more confidence than I felt, "probably touching up her makeup." Eliza snorted. "Dad, Mom hasn't cared about touching up around you in years. That's kind of the problem." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, genuinely confused. Caroline and Eliza's husband exchanged glances. "It means you haven't been paying attention," Jason said, swirling his wine. "Again." When Margaret returned, her eyes were slightly red. I reached for her hand under the table. She allowed it, but didn't squeeze back. After the main course, I signaled the waiter to bring the envelope containing the Italy tickets and a vintage Cartier watch I'd found, identical to one she'd admired in a shop window during our honeymoon. "Before dessert," I announced, "I have something for Margaret." I slid the package across the table. "Happy anniversary, my love." The table went quiet as she slowly opened it. Her hands trembled slightly as she examined the watch and the meticulously planned itinerary. "Italy," she whispered, "after all this time." 3 weeks, I said proudly. "Just you and me. No interruptions, no hospital calls. I've even arranged for a private tour of those Renaissance gardens you always wanted to see." Margaret placed everything back in the envelope with deliberate care. Then she reached into her purse and withdrew her own envelope, placing it beside mine. "I've been trying to find the right moment," she said. "I suppose this is as good as any." When I opened it, I found divorce papers, pre-signed, dated 3 months earlier. "I don't understand," I stammered, aware of our children watching intently. "We're going to Italy. I'm making everything right." "It's 45 years too late, Richard," Margaret said quietly. "And I've met someone who doesn't make me wait." The silence that followed was deafening. Eliza began to cry silently. Jason looked unsurprised. "You all knew?" I looked around the table in disbelief. "Mom told us last month," Jason said. "She wanted to wait until after our anniversary dinner. Said you deserved one last family meal." One last? I couldn't finish the sentence. The room began to spin. I stood up abruptly, knocking over my water glass. "I need some air." As I stumbled toward the door, I heard Margaret call my name. But the restaurant lights were suddenly too bright, the floor unsteady beneath my feet. The last thing I remember was a waiter rushing toward me as everything went black. I later learned I'd suffered a minor stroke at the restaurant, stress-induced, the doctor said. The irony wasn't lost on me. The renowned cardiothoracic surgeon felled by his own failing heart. But lying in that empty hospital room, reading Margaret's diary, I realized my heart had been failing long before any physical symptoms appeared. The diary entries spanned years. Some were mundane, book club meetings, visits with the grandchildren. Others cut deep. Richard missed Thanksgiving again, claimed a transplant couldn't wait, but the OR schedule showed nothing. Where was he really? Thomas understands what it's like to be invisible in your own marriage. His wife died never knowing she mattered. I won't make the same mistake. The kids say I should have left years ago. Maybe they're right. When the nurse finally answered my call button, I demanded to see my wife. "Sir, you need to rest. Your family has been notified of your condition." "Then why isn't anyone here?" I asked. She avoided my eyes. "I'll see if I can reach them again." Hours passed. Night fell. I read more entries, each one a knife twist. "I've loved Richard for 40 years, but I've been in love with Thomas for 7. The difference is, Thomas sees me." When Margaret finally appeared the next morning, she seemed surprised to find me awake. More surprised to see her diary open on my lap. "So now you read my private thoughts?" Her voice was cold, her posture defensive by the doorway. "Where were you?" I asked. "I had a stroke and woke up alone." "I was with Thomas," she said simply. "The kids are flying in today. I came to check on you before they arrive." To check if I was dead or alive? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, a harsh sound in the sterile room. "You've been planning to leave me for months, apparently having an affair for years, and you talk about fair?" Margaret stepped fully into the room now, chin raised. "And you've been absent for decades, Richard, physically present but mentally elsewhere. Even now, you make this about you? You could have talked to me instead of writing in this damn book." I held up the diary. "I tried. For years, I tried." "You were too busy saving everyone else to notice your own family was drowning." The door opened and Jason appeared, looking exhausted from his flight. He assessed the situation instantly. "Mom, the doctor wants to speak with you about Dad's condition," he said, clearly an excuse to separate us. "Tell me about Thomas," I demanded before she could leave. "Was he worth throwing away 45 years? Margaret paused at the door. "Thomas was dying of pancreatic cancer when I met him at a hospital volunteer program. He had 6 months to live, but stretched it to 7 years through sheer will because he wanted more time with me. Even dying, he gave me more attention than you ever did healthy. And where is he now, this paragon of devotion?" I asked mockingly. Her eyes filled with tears. "He died 3 months ago. His last wish was that I wouldn't waste whatever time I have left in a marriage that died decades ago." The revelation hit harder than my stroke. "So this isn't even about him anymore?" "It never was about him," Margaret said quietly. It was always about us, and how there hasn't been an us since the kids were born. I just needed someone else to show me what I was missing before I could find the courage to leave. You're leaving a sick man who just had a stroke? I played my final card. Jason stepped between us. Dad, stop. We'll take care of you, but you can't manipulate Mom into staying, not anymore. As they left the room, I called out, I changed my will last week, put everything in a trust for you and the kids. The Italy trip was supposed to be my last grand gesture before telling you I was giving you everything. Margaret turned back, her expression a mixture of pity and resolve. That's always been your problem, Richard. You thought things and money could substitute for time and presence. I never wanted your money. I just wanted you. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with the beeping monitors and the crushing weight of 4 decades of misplaced priorities. I was discharged 3 days later. Jason insisted I stay with him and Caroline in their Beacon Hill brownstone rather than return to the Newton house alone. Margaret had already moved most of her things to a condo in Cambridge, apparently purchased months ago with money she'd inherited from her mother. She was planning this for a long time, I said, as Jason helped settle me into their guest room. Can you blame her? He asked, arranging my medications on the nightstand. You've been planning your exit from this family since before Eliza was born. His words stung with their accuracy. I was providing for you all. We needed a father more than a provider, Jason said simply. I became a pediatrician instead of a surgeon because I saw what your career choice cost our family. I won't make that mistake with my kids. I hadn't known that was why he chose pediatrics, one of countless things I'd missed. The first week at Jason's was a blur of self-pity and anger. I refused to sign the divorce papers, clinging to the fiction that this was temporary. Eliza visited daily, her forgiveness coming easier than Jason's, though her boundaries were firmer. Mom's happier than I've seen her in years, she told me over chess one afternoon. Even after Thomas died, she had this peace about her decision. Tell me about him, I finally asked, swallowing my pride. This man who apparently made her so happy. Eliza studied the board. He was a high school history teacher, widowed, had 2 grown daughters, loved poetry and jazz, played saxophone in a community band. Nothing fancy or impressive by your standards. But he listened when Mom talked, remembered her favorite flowers, and showed up when he said he would. Such simple things I'd failed to provide. The turning point came when Caroline found me trying to access Margaret's email on Jason's computer. "What are you doing?" she asked from the doorway. "I need to understand," I said, not bothering to hide my actions. "I need to see their messages, how it started." Caroline sat beside me. "Richard, that's not going to help. And it's exactly the kind of behavior that drove Margaret away, trying to control the narrative instead of accepting her feelings." As my daughter-in-law gently closed the laptop, she added, "You know, I almost left Jason our 2nd year of marriage. He was working crazy resident hours, just like you did. I had pregnancy complications with Tyler, and Jason missed 3 critical appointments. This was news to me. What happened?" I left him a note similar to those diary entries. But unlike you, he read it, actually read it, and made changes before it was too late. She squeezed my shoulder. "It's never too late to learn, though." That night, I called Margaret and asked to meet. We chose neutral ground, the Boston Public Garden, where we'd once walked as residents, planning our future. She looked younger somehow, dressed in clothes I didn't recognize, her silver hair styled differently. We sat by the duck pond in uncomfortable silence until I finally spoke. "I've been reading about emotional absence," I said. "About how being physically present but mentally elsewhere can be as damaging as abandonment." Margaret nodded cautiously. "I'm not contesting the divorce," I continued. "But before we finalize everything, I want you to know I understand now what I did. Not just to you, but to Jason and Eliza." "What brought this revelation?" she asked, skepticism evident. "Your diary? My stroke? Our children's honesty? Take your pick." I managed a rueful smile. Turns out, near-death experiences are actually quite clarifying. For the first time, she smiled back, a small one, but genuine. "I have a proposition," I said, "not a manipulation or a delay tactic. The divorce proceeds as planned, but I'd like to give you something first." I handed her an envelope, not the Italy tickets, but something else entirely. "What's this?" she asked. "Deed to the house. It's yours, no strings attached, and a letter releasing you from any obligation to care for me in old age or illness. The kids have copies. I've made arrangements for professional care when the time comes." Her eyes widened. "Richard, I'm also donating most of my savings to start a medical scholarship in your name at the nursing school. Seems fitting that your legacy will help future caregivers when mine was just cutting people open." Tears formed in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because for once in my life, I'm trying to love someone the way they need to be loved, not the way that's convenient for me." I stood to leave. "The divorce papers will be signed and delivered to your lawyer tomorrow." As I turned to go, she called after me. "What about Italy?" I paused. "Take Thomas's daughters. From what Eliza tells me, they lost their mother young and had a father who actually showed up. They deserve to see where their dad would have taken their stepmother if he'd lived." The unexpected twist came 3 months later. The divorce was final, but Margaret and I had begun a cautious friendship, meeting occasionally for coffee, attending our grandson's baseball games separately but acknowledging each other civilly. I'd started volunteering at a grief support group, finally using my experience with loss to help others rather than hide from my own emotions. After one session, I found Margaret waiting in the lobby. "I thought you had book club tonight," I said, surprised.
"I wanted to give you this in person." She handed me a small box. Inside was my old wedding band and a note. "Some circles are meant to be broken so new patterns can form. I forgive you. Now forgive yourself." It wasn't reconciliation, that door had closed. But it was something perhaps more valuable, permission to move forward unburdened by the weight of what might have been. It's been a year since I woke up in that hospital room. My recovery continues, not just from the stroke, but from the decades of emotional blindness that caused more damage than any physical ailment ever could. Margaret and I now attend our grandchildren's events together as friends. Last month, she invited me to her condo for dinner, where I met Thomas's daughters. They showed me photos of their father, an ordinary-looking man with extraordinary capacity for presence, and thanked me for the Italy tickets they'd used to scatter some of his ashes in Venice. Yesterday, I moved into a smaller place near the hospital where I volunteer, teaching young doctors about work-life balance, a subject I mastered too late. My new apartment has fewer possessions, but more purpose. On my wall hangs a framed page from Margaret's diary, the last entry she wrote after our garden meeting. Today, Richard finally saw me. Too late for us, but perhaps not too late for him. I keep her diary entry not as a reminder of what I lost, but as evidence that even at 70, change is possible. The greatest surgery I ever performed was the painful extraction of my own ego, and though the recovery has been difficult, the prognosis is better than I deserve. If you're watching this and recognize yourself in my story, don't wait for a stroke or an empty hospital room to wake you up. The people who matter most aren't impressed by your title or bank account. They just want your attention, your presence, your time. That's the only currency that truly matters in the end.
If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to see more real-life journeys of transformation. And remember, sometimes the most important person to operate on is yourself.